Francis, thanks. We have a lot of ground to cover and a great group of speakers, so let's jump right in with Clint Funk, Senior Solutions Consultant at Adobe Federal, David McNeely, Chief Technology Officer at Dichotic Centrify, Hunter Downey, Vice President at SAP NS2, and Bill Wright, Director of Federal Government Affairs at Splunk. Hunter, I'd love to start with you today. What should organizations be focused on regarding FedRAMP?
Thanks so much. It's interesting because I think when FedRAMP was first introduced, a lot of customers thought of it as a value proposition to adopt. But in reality, FedRAMP is a ticket to engage, how to adopt cloud solutions with the federal government. And I think what needs to occur is that organizations need to pivot not so much what are the solutions available to the business value they can adopt that is already adhered to FedRAMP. That's what we do from an NS2 perspective. Instead of talking about these are the standards, because now everyone needs them, it's about introducing analytics, data security, enterprise solutions, which is a much more exciting space for a lot of my federal counterparts.
It's a great jumping off point to my second question there, Hunter. Thank you. Bill, what are you watching right now from a policy perspective? Hunter mentions analytics. Where does data fit into the equation here?
Yeah, so it's a great question, George. There's so much going on in the tech policy space. In fact, I think I'd be hard pressed to remember a time when there has been more impactful public policy coming down. There's going to be long-lasting effects on the tech industry and on our federal government. The biggest movement, of course, is the cybersecurity executive order that was signed on May 12th. Came as a result of a number of high-profile cyber attacks, Colonial Pipeline, of course, the Microsoft Exchange server intrusion, SolarWinds. But frankly, many of these issues that the EO seeks to address have really persisted a long time before SolarWinds, long time before Colonial. I think the EO itself really gets a lot of the big muscle movements right. Moving to a zero trust mindset, increasing CISA's authority to access object level data from the agencies, of course, through the CDM program. The emphasis on log retention and log capabilities. This is such an important piece of threat hunting. Supply chain secure software development improvements, even information sharing improvements. So any one of these could have been their own discrete EO, so very detailed. But the reality is that these collective objectives are table stakes, really, if we want to improve our cybersecurity posture of the federal government. And if there is one thing that all of these significant policy movements have in common, it's around data, whether it's zero trust, whether it's CDM, the entire section on log retention and log analysis, it's all the effective collection and use of data. Lastly, there are a number of other big policy movements out there. I would put the $1 billion in technology modernization funds out there to help agencies get off of these ineffective and often insecure legacy technologies. On the Hill, we are following, of course, like everyone else, Senator Warner, Rubio, and Collins' data breach notification bill. Could be introduced as early as tomorrow. Bipartisan bill. It's got a lot of momentum behind it. It requires federal contractors to notify CISA within 24 hours of a data breach or face very steep penalties. So lots going on around the public policy realm, and we're tracking it pretty closely here.
Ton to unpack there, Bill. I'm going to come back to some of those themes. Thanks for that table setter there. David, what cybersecurity best practices should organizations be employing to prevent attacks? And I'm thinking PAM, privileged access management, MFA, multi-factor authentication, and others.
Yes, thanks, George. PAM is probably a good place to start. Most organizations have practices for MFA in order for their users to gain access to the enterprise network, right? Remote access, work from home. But what we're finding is that more and more often it's better practice to have MFA enforcement on each and every one of the target servers, databases, applications that you may have running as a way to ensure that it really is a human being that's making the access and that it's one of yours and not an adversary. PAM solutions also are really good things that people need to have deployed. It's designed to protect the administrative accounts, the most privileged accounts on each of those particular target systems. And those PAM tools have many different sets of capabilities. What we're finding lately is that organizations are trying to move to a zero standing privilege environment. And in order to do that, what they're establishing is a just-in-time approach, which means that nobody has access to anything within the data center, none of the servers or applications. If they wanted to gain access in a privileged fashion, they would need to make a request that gets approved. And once approved, then they can get time-limited access to that particular system they've made the request for. And once that time is rolled off, then they go back to a steady state, which should be that no one has access to any of the sensitive privileged systems within the environment. During the time that they have that access, it should be just enough privilege. It shouldn't be that they get to use the full administrative account and do anything they want. They should ideally only have the specific set of rights in order to accomplish the task at hand. So with those three things, MFA, just in time, and just enough privilege, moving to a zero standing privilege environment, those are really the best things that they could do as far as protecting against cyber threats.
Let me jump in with just a quick follow-up question there, David. How will their security posture, these organizations that you're talking about, be shaped by moving applications, moving services to the cloud?
Well, movement to the cloud is really just a deployment option for the particular application. Normally, what we find is that people tend to take a more focused look at security as they move things to cloud, just because they're no longer inside your data center. And there was a certain comfort in having things in your data center protected by your own firewalls. But as people move things out to cloud, they tend to rethink and revisit a lot of the decisions and assumptions that they had made previously. So I do find that a lot of those people moving to cloud are a bit more secure, but that's because they're taking a second look at how they did things previously and to look at designing security in a fashion that fits the cloud environment better, especially when you've got applications that can automatically scale out based on load to the application. And the deployment team tends to automate a lot of the security that they put in place as they go to deploy those applications.
So Clint, you come in with a slightly different lens than our fellow panelists here. It's why I'm so appreciative of you being able to join us today. Let's talk state and local governments. How are they approaching IT modernization, cloud computing right now generally? And where does mobility fit in there?
Well, thank you, George, for asking that. Yes, I do focus on state and local governments, and I am a solution consultant. So I am kind of boots on the ground, and I work with customers daily. And I'm always looking for solutions. You know, how can we help? How can we move them forward quicker than we have in the past? Certainly COVID-19 has shed a really bright light on the importance of government digitizing their operations. And so with COVID, they've certainly been accelerating it. And, you know, if there could be one good thing coming out of the pandemic, I guess that's it, is getting governments to transition to digital much quicker, because there are a lot of concerns there with digital forms as opposed to paper forms, with more efficient workflows as opposed to paper-based workflows, using electronic signatures as opposed to wet signatures, collaborating on documents, and building more successful websites that are more self-intuitive for citizens out there. So there's been a lot that's really happened in working with a lot of organizations, both big and small, and not just state and local, but I also do some work with the federal government as well. And they're all pushing in the same direction. Some of them are getting there quicker than others, but it's good to see, and it makes me feel good to help them kind of move forward and point them in the right direction that can really help them speed their transformation.
So Hunter, as Clint talks about transformation, getting governments transition to digital quicker, you know, you mentioned analytics earlier. What numbers, what data should they be looking at? What building blocks for their foundation should they be putting in place right now so they can really capitalize on the IT modernization that Bill identified, all that spending, the TMF, the possible increase in TMF spending of, another $500 million in President Biden's budget. I mean, there's just a lot out there.
I appreciate the question, George. And actually, I want to give kudos to Bill, David, and Clint, because the perspectives we've shared so far in this panel are interesting. I think Bill did a really good job talking about where the industry is and where the investment is. And David's, focused a lot in terms of how do we secure cloud enterprises, and Clint, your background in terms of the different types of governments that you support is helpful. And the reason why I share that is because when we all lean forward, and we don't look at what's the end of 2021, but we look over the next 3 or 4 years, it's really about measuring that we're successful. To your point, George, when people take a look at analytics, we're no longer in the inventory game. How much do I have left? Talking about budget to actuals is not a value proposition. It should be a standard across all different versions of the government. And the reason why it's so important is now there's capabilities that make it easier for you to have total transparency across your enterprise. And the reason why I share this with you is because it can be hard. People look at numbers and metrics in different ways. How much do you have left as an organization? How much are you spending left on a program or a mission? And the way to slice and dice success, the key point is have the best capabilities at your disposal to make sure that you illustrate your successes.
So building on that, Hunter, in some cases, the government still has firewalls between the IT side of their operations, the business side of their operations. Do you see that firewall in your work in the private sector as well, or are things vastly different there?
I appreciate the question. We actually, our sweet spot is the different government organizations, in particular the federal government. And we've expanded to the private sector because our mantra was really about trying to make sure that we could offer cloud in the most secure manner and the easiest way to adopt. Now, your point is so interesting. In the private sector, historically, IT organizations roll to the business. And I think from a commercial model, organizations are trying to manufacture and sell a product, find the easiest way to open it up to different consumers. So they stay in tandem. I applaud the federal government because, in essence, at times they separate the organizations, and it's two parties looking at the same problem, working together. We always say this, bad actors don't take vacations. And I think it's something that David mentioned earlier that was so important. Cloud now is easily accessible, secure cloud for the federal government. But the key point is transparency and securing it in a way they need to be successful. And that's really the dynamic that the federal government and government organizations have done a great job for adoption and consumption.
So, Bill, what do you hear so far that really sticks out to you? And second part of that question is, do you think lawmakers, policymakers on Capitol Hill are getting the message that these IT leaders are conveying here?
Yeah, I think that's always the toughest part. We look at the Biden administration's FY22 budget request detailed earlier this month. I'd characterize it, I think, as very forward-looking. It asks for considerable increase in research and development. Reflecting broadly, I think it represents recognition that we need to be investing today if we're going to get those benefits down the road. Our adversaries are certainly making those investments. Overall, I think the big R&D increases are a good thing, but we want to make sure that a lot of that money can be spent both accelerating near-term applications of advanced tech, so we can move them to commercialization more quickly. Some quantum applications in that realm. While we need foundational investments for the long-term research, there's still enormous opportunities for the government to speed up these critical capabilities today. So I think maintaining that balance is really important. On the DoD side of the house, nearly $112 billion around R&D. There's a recognition that as a country, we need to finally get off a lot of these legacy platforms and technologies and make these forward-looking investments, AI, 5G, microelectronics. It's also recognition that we're in a technical as well as a military competition with a peer adversary in China, of course. The administration's focusing on prioritizing advanced technologies. I think the more interesting piece is the federal civilian side of the R&D. Across more than 20 federal civilian agencies is about a 9% bump up from last year. Now, I think the tougher part, I think this is the part you were getting to, George, is whether we can convince Congress that we can focus on the horizon with these kinds of forward-looking investments, but do it in a way that doesn't really sacrifice our readiness today. So personally, I think the budget request that came out of the administration really strikes that balance. And my hope, of course, is that Congress hears that message and makes the right investments as well.
Do you think, Bill, that this very unique time period, which we all just, lived through and could continue to live through for some time, this massive shift to telework, federal employees needing technology to continue to deliver on mission for the American people, is like an example in their mind as they think about R&D spending in the future? Yeah,
I do. There are a lot of terrible things to come out of the COVID period, and there were also some good things. I think it was a catalyst across the government to move to more advanced, resilient technologies. A lot of times I think about some of the close work that we did at Splunk with some agencies. One good example is with the VA. At the outset of COVID-19, the Department of Veterans Affairs had a massive surge in the demand for telehealth services. And as a result, veterans and clinicians experienced massive degraded video, call quality, with calls being dropped thousands per day. So we partnered with the VA's site reliability engineers, leveraged Splunk's FedRAMP authorized SaaS platform, IT services intelligence solutions. And together, the VA and Splunk were able to identify and remedy multiple misconfigurations within the application itself. So we reduced the number of virtual appointments, the dropping of virtual appointments from thousands per day to under 10. And most importantly, I think in human terms, that means our veterans were able to get the critical services that they need and that they deserve. So, I think Congress is hearing a lot of this. I think we're finding a lot of quality increases across the spectrum in technology and more resilient technology. So I think they're recognizing that those investments are going to serve going into the future.
David, staying on this theme of the R&D landscape, it involves a lot more machines these days, even in the identity field. Why is that? What stands out there for you?
Yeah, so what we're hearing from a lot of customers is the move to microservices. Many customers, when they start designing applications out in cloud-based environments, design them for elasticity so that they can respond and react to the needs of their consumers, constituents. For example, as the load on a website increases, you'll want to increase the number of machines that are responding to that load and providing access to the government services. And the challenge with that is that more machines need to authenticate to each other. As you design these applications for that kind of elasticity, you end up with more computers that respond to the request. More systems need to access the databases. Those same developers are moving to a microservices architecture that tends to create thousands more microservices, containers, than the virtual machines that we used to have in the old days when it was all on premises in physical machines and data centers, and that just leads to a lot more service accounts, a lot more machines that talk to each other. I think we also find many times the human element, the IT staff or DevOps staff, they end up accessing a lot of these management tools, and the management tools are the ones that manage all of those machines and what the machines can access. So there's a proliferation of different kinds of technologies that people start adopting as they move to cloud, and that just results in orders of magnitude more computers and more identities for each of those computers as they need to access each other or access data in order to carry out the needs of the organization.
So if I'm reading between the lines there, correct me if I'm wrong, David, but automation might be something that can help speed up that process, make things more efficient.
Yes, I mean, automation is at the core of how a lot of these applications are built and constructed nowadays. Security has to be built into every layer at this point. As you design the application, you have to design it in such a way that is secure. We're starting to find, people need things like secrets, services. It's nothing more than a way for the next new server to pick up the same configuration data as all the others, so that it can now participate and help to balance the load across that application. That secret server has to be integrated pretty tightly into the environment in such a way that it can then provide that data set back to the applications. It's a lot like how humans need to go log into applications. They need credentials. Computers need the exact same thing. So we're now providing identity and access management for the computers, much like we do for the humans.
Boy, well, Clint, another kind of technology that we could take advantage of to speed things up is digital document modernization. That's your specialty. How does that impact organization security posture?
Thank you for asking that, George. It has a big impact because a lot of organizations are really concerned about cloud, just cloud. And there are ways that they can address that very easily if they do their research, and I think the key factor is training their users. I think that's one of the things that it's easy for all of us to kind of get away from because we're technology people, but we're dealing with people. And training them to use the technology correctly and to be responsible about it is really the key, I think, to modernizing all this. We're in a hybrid environment. We're not going to go back. Some folks are going to go back to work, but whether you are at your home office or your office, you need to be responsible about what you're doing. One good example, but this was a couple of years ago actually, and it was a large government agency that I'm not going to mention, but they really wanted to use the Creative Cloud services because they felt that would really enhance their workflow. There was a lot of concern about that, so they got together, they really pushed for it. They got together with their IT folks, their security folks, and their legal folks, and they came up with a contract that said, okay, here are the do's and don'ts of what you can do with these digital documents and how you can store them and where you can store them and all that. Then they went through various iterations. And the last one I heard, again, this was a couple of years ago, was that they had to have that contract posted. Now, I realize that that's not a solution for everyone for a lot of different reasons, but I like the whole thing of putting the responsibility back on the user, not only the organization itself, but also the user themselves too.
Absolutely. So Clint mentions this sort of contract modernization effort. Bill mentioned VA. Hunter, what about you at SAP NS2? Any case studies that stand out in this digitization, data analytics arena that we're talking about right now?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. First, the nice part about it is NS2 is National Security Services. So you can see the wheelhouse of our space. For us, we leaned in very heavy with the Department of Defense. And in particular, our goal was not for customers just to sample cloud capabilities. Our goal was enterprise scale. So imagine supporting extremely large DoD organizations with their financials, their budget, their analytics. And that's the wheelhouse, but it goes back to the first point I shared with you. If we understand the standards to engage, federal civilian, FedRAMP, DoD has a different scale, and we can talk that we've adhered to the standards they need to be successful. Now we're talking about adoption, usage, and really a joint success together. We want to offer the best of what we can do from an innovation in a way that achieves their security, that provides them the most value in their day-to-day to achieve their mission. So that's really the wheelhouse of what we do, and that's what really drives us internally.
What about you, David? Any case studies stand out from your recent work that encapsulate what we're talking about here today?
Well, we have quite a few customers in the DoD space as well that end up using technologies from ours, from our portfolio in order to secure their environments, address their insider threat programs and things like that. Most are concerned about making it easier for their staff to be able to gain access to the infrastructure and to support running the applications and services that address their mission. Most are trying to ensure that they have appropriate human access, that it's not too broad, that it's not they're accessing the systems that they really need to gain access to in order to make sure that they don't have another insider threat issue.
Bill, you've seen it time and time again in your career in federal. Close cooperation between the government and the private sector can result in the success or failure of some of the most massive, important programs that government has to execute on. Any sort of stories that stand out in there of late that really encapsulate that for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think the cybersecurity EO is a wonderful example of public-private partnership. I think every section in there is an opportunity, either one opportunity or more, to work with government to help develop some of the best practices, some of the rules, whether you're working with NIST or one of the other agencies. So I think the EO really encapsulates or is recognition that industry can and should play a really important role in securing the federal cybersecurity landscape, and also the importance around public-private partnerships. There is no company, there is no government in the world that can really go it alone anymore. The cyber threat landscape is evolving too quickly and growing too quickly for anyone to go it alone. So I think the EO really recognizes that and really brings industry in as a partner, which I think doing that on the front end will yield a lot of positive results on the back end.
You can always rely on Bill Wright to just tie a bow on things for you folks. I want to thank our panelists, Bill, Hunter, Clint, David. Really appreciate your time. Great conversation. We'll talk to you real soon.